part of a subcommittee, and I think now the full committee, that has worked in such a bipartisan manner, and I very much appreciate the collaboration with Ranking Member Moran that we have enjoyed, and I'm sure we will see that continue throughout this bill process as well. I also appreciate the leadership of Chair Murray and Vice Chair Collins in making clear that we are going to go ahead and mark up bills and that we expect things to get to the floor. So hopefully we will continue to repeat that and it will be true. With that, I would like to welcome today's witnesses, NASA Administrator Bill Nelson and the National Science Foundation Director, Setaraman Panchanathan. Dr. Panch. Wow. I'm getting better. Also want to welcome Chair Murray. You didn't hear me say how much I appreciate the leadership of you and Senator Collins on the committee and the return to regular order. Thank you. So thank you both for being here. And Dr. Punch, thank you for joining me in New Hampshire last fall. I know you're coming back, and I know that Administrator Nelson has also been to New Hampshire, and you're coming back, so I'm looking forward to that. Whether developing the future of artificial intelligence or nuclear propulsion, the agencies that you both represent are on the cutting edge of technological innovation and instrumental in training the next generation of scientists, in particular scientists in the STEM fields, which are so important to the future, our future economic competitiveness in this country. Now, I should begin with pointing out that this has been a very good year for both of your agencies. Building off of the bipartisan CHIPS and Science Act, NSF established the Technology Innovation and Partnerships, or the TIP Directorate. This is the first new directorate in 30 years, and TIP will leverage NSF's successes and allow the agency to more rapidly advance technological innovation. And of course, as for NASA, the images from the James Webb Space Telescope have already reshaped our understanding of the universe, and all of those pictures are just getting started. The Double Asteroid Redirection Test, or DART, changed the orbit of an asteroid. And then, of course, NASA successfully launched Artemis 1, traveling 1.4 million miles around the moon and back over its 25-day journey. It serves as a major first step to return humans to the moon. So I know we all can't wait for Artemis 2, and you just announced the new 4-person crew, which includes a woman and a person of color, so that's very exciting as well. I'm very proud that New Hampshire plays an important part of these successes with our universities, like the University of New Hampshire, that has led NASA science missions, including Glimmer and Helioswarm, and is competing for the NSF Regional Innovation Engines, and Granite State companies like RDF Corporation and Spincraft, which are making major contributions to the NASA Artemis missions. However, even as we celebrate these major achievements, we can't take our continued leadership for granted. Our global competitors, especially China, are not waiting idly by. They're investing heavily in scientific and technological innovation. And I like to remind so many people when they talk about our competitive edge that when we were in a government shutdown several years ago, China was landing on the dark side of the moon. So it is imperative that we keep pace, that we stay focused, and that makes the work of the subcommittee all the more important. So that's why I'm pleased that in the fiscal year 2023 omnibus, Congress, on a bipartisan basis, provided more than $1 billion in increase for the NSF. That's the largest increase ever for the National Science Foundation, and a $1.3 billion increase for NASA. President Biden's fiscal year 2024 budget requests for NASA and NSF build on this progress. The President's request includes $11.3 billion for NSF, which is an increase of $1.44 billion, or 16%, above the total 23 enacted level. For NASA, the FY24 request is $27.2 billion, an increase of $1.8 billion, or 7%, above the 23 enacted level. These requests are important as we think about the innovations that we need to achieve in the coming years. Now, I know that there are also some issues with the requests. In particular, I'm concerned with the cost overruns and the NASA Science Directorate that have led to proposed cuts to NASA heliophysics for the second budget request in a row. And Administrator Nelson, we will get to the bottom of that between you and me. I'm also concerned that both agencies have proposed insufficient levels of investment to address the highest priorities of recent decadal surveys. Now, as I said, in conclusion, we can't afford to take our continued leadership for granted. That's why I am such a strong supporter of NASA and NSF. Your agencies drive us onward through curiosity-driven inquiry and exploration, and they ensure that the foundation for the future is built in the United States. With that, I will turn to my ranking member, Senator Moran.
Chairwoman, thank you very much, and I appreciate your recognition of the efforts of the members of this committee and subcommittee, and hopefully the full committee as well, to work in a bipartisan way. Certainly, it is a pleasure to do that in general, and it's specifically desirable and enjoyable to do that with you, with NASA, and with NSF. I appreciate both of our witnesses who are here today, and I've learned that both of them intend to be in your home state twice, and so I would re-up my invitation that they can return to Kansas so that we can stay equal in our opportunities with NSF.
It's easier to get to New Hampshire.
And with that, I have been to New Hampshire. All right, I've been there. Let me thank both of our witnesses today for what they do on behalf of this country. It's a demanding job that each have. A lot of this has to do with our economic future and our national security, and this is really important in these challenging times. I'm going to forego the rest of my opening statement because the Intelligence Committee is meeting at the same time today, and I'm going to be there. I'm going to stay long enough to hear the witnesses and ask my questions, but I want to try to shorten up the time that I occupy. Having said that, Bill Nelson, I wanted to thank you for the opportunity to visit with the Artemis astronauts by phone. What an exceptional group of people. It gives me great pride to see how NASA has chosen this team, and the diversity is welcome as well. I would tell you, as someone who has visited the Cosmosphere, you, Bill Nelson, the commander on behalf of the crew indicated that to me, do you know that you have the best space museum on planet Earth in Kansas? I've repeated it more than once, and I'm repeating it today for the purpose of Kansans knowing that, and Americans as well, as given a stamp of approval by the Artemis astronauts. I look forward to hearing your testimony.
Well, thank you very much, Senator Moran, and we will include your full statement for the record.
Thank you.
So we can get his full statement and read it later?
Absolutely. I'm sure he would be willing to share it with you right now.
I would love a copy.
While we have talked about bipartisanship, perhaps we should have lessons in civility.
Let me begin by asking Administrator Nelson if he would begin, and then we'll go to Dr. Ponch.
Madam Chairman, Madam Big Chairman, Senator Moran, Senator Kennedy, I miss you guys, but I can tell you, you have given me not only a very challenging job when you confirm me, but it is a very exciting job because we're going back to the moon and then we're going to Mars and beyond with humans. We're already on the surface of Mars with a truck-size rover that is digging these cores, and there are 10 of them in titanium tubes about that big that are on the surface. They're putting another 30 in the rover. And so when we go back with another lander, if the rover called Perseverance is still working, then it's going to come over to the lander and deposit the 30 tubes. If it is not working, the backup, interestingly, is the lander has 2 helicopters. Now, as you know, this rover that's landed had a helicopter just to see if we could fly in a 1% atmosphere. And lo and behold, not only has it flown, yesterday it flew its 50th mission, the little helicopter Ingenuity. So as a backup, just to give you some of the excitement that goes on to NASA, as a backup, 2 helicopters are going to be on the next lander that could then go over and pick up the 10 samples on the surface as a backup, bringing them over to the lander, which then has the ascent vehicle, which rendezvous with the European vehicle that then brings it back to Earth. And that's just one program. And Madam Chairman, you mentioned already so much else, what we've done, the telescope, DART, all the science that we're doing. For each one of you, I appreciate you all being here because you have big time space in each of your states. Madam Full Committee Chairman, of course, the Boeing Company located there. Senator Kennedy, the Boeing Company that is putting together the core of this big rocket called the Space Launch System. Senator Britt, with all of the space activity that she has in her state, including the Marshall Space Flight Center, which is the center, by the way, that started over a half century ago, all of our successful efforts to get a human being in space. And Senator Moran has just exquisite aeronautics, and remember, that's the first A in NASA, is aeronautics. And Senator Shaheen, the University of New Hampshire, that does so much in heliophysics. And so I'm going to curtail my remarks because you already said it, Madam Chairman. And I want to give my friend over here who is doing a great job, Punch. He is a true scientist of the first order with first-class science that is coming out of his agency. So I'll stop right there, Madam Chair.
Well, thank you very much. I'm pleased to see that neither of you are enthusiastic about the work that you're doing. Dr. Punch.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Madam Chair, for being here also, and Ranking Member Moran, and Senator Kennedy and Senator Britt for being here with us. It's truly an honor, sir, to be with you as a leader of NASA and doing great things. We are, as a child enthusiast and continuing enthusiast of what's happening in space, truly an honor to see all the great work that NASA is doing and being with you here today. It's an honor to appear before you all again to discuss the President's FY24 budget request for NSF and how our agency is inspiring the talent and unleashing the innovations that will keep the U.S. the global leader in science and engineering for decades to come. First, I want to thank this committee for your amazing support of NSF. Chair, you mentioned the historic increases to NSF. I'm so grateful for that. NSF is very grateful. The FY23 appropriations were the largest one-time increase in NSF's funding, and it came at the most critical time. Your continued leadership and support are central to ensuring that we can meet the challenge of what is surely a defining moment in global competition. For more than 70 years, NSF has been an important component of our nation's success. By investing in the amazing talent this country has to offer, and by attracting the brightest minds from around the world, NSF has been a catalyst for countless scientific breakthroughs, major advancements in engineering and manufacturing, and so much more. In doing so, NSF has powered the United States economy, transformed American lives, and helped secure our national defense. In fact, many of the key technology areas we will talk about today are rooted in decades of sustained investments by NSF in exploratory research that has transformed the way we see the world and expanded the frontiers of knowledge. However, we are currently facing intense global competition like we have never seen before. Our competitors are investing heavily in key technologies like artificial intelligence, quantum information science, and they seek to outcompete us. Our ability to achieve scientific breakthroughs and unlock the promise of technological developments will determine our continued global leadership, and our success is vital to our economic and national security. With the passage of the CHIPS and Science Act of 2022, Congress put in place a roadmap to meet this challenge, and to do so while spurring innovation in communities in every region of our country. That's what makes it exciting. The law positions the agency to capitalize on the uniquely American research ecosystem that includes academia, private industry, the government, and other partners to quickly translate research into impacts that benefit our nation. The historic FY 2024 budget request of $11.3 billion is fully aligned with this vision and invests in the three pillars central to achieving the goals of the CHIPS and Science Act. First, we must strengthen our commitment to funding the fundamental exploratory-based research that is the heart of NSF's mission. We call this strengthening the established NSF. Second, we must realize the promise of the Technology Innovation Partnerships Directorate, the new directorate, or TIP as we call it, and accelerate the nation's technology and innovation enterprise through investments in use-inspired translational breakthroughs. Finally, it is exceedingly important that we inspire talent by creating opportunities for every demographic and socioeconomic group in every geographic region of our country. The FY24 request includes $1.2 billion in funding for the TIP Directorate. This investment will strengthen and scale investments in breakthrough technologies, innovation, and translation. This includes $300 million for the FY24 for the NSF Regional Innovation Engines program, and we are very excited by the strong interest and amazing proposals we have received already. When we first announced this funding opportunity, we received hundreds of concept papers covering every state of our nation. In the coming weeks, we will make the first planning grants, and in the fall, the first award for full-scale engines. These investments will empower partnerships to catalyze innovation all across our country. This budget also invests heavily in broadening participation in STEM, an important priority. The request includes over $1.8 billion to create opportunities everywhere and to increase the participation of underserved groups in STEM. These activities include programs focused on building research capacity at HBCUs and minority-serving institutions, investing in EBSCO jurisdictions, and finding new approaches to ensure that everyone has a chance to participate in the innovations of the future. The budget also invests in critical research infrastructure, including a new MREFC project, Major Research Equipment Facilities and Construction Project, the Leadership Class Computing Facility at the University of Texas, Austin. The FY24 request invests in major research instrumentation and the mid-scale research infrastructure that is crucial to keeping our nation's research enterprise at the cutting edge. Finally, NSF's role in workforce training has become increasingly important as the country makes significant investments in technology development, including semiconductor manufacturing. These investments require strong partnerships between the federal government, academia, and private industry. In the past few months, NSF has announced partnerships with Micron, Intel, IBM, Samsung, and others exactly for this purpose. It has been my pleasure to meet the researchers and students in your home states. I've had the privilege of visiting many of you, and I'm going to visit more of you, and it's truly a pleasure to see the unbelievable talent and ideas all across our nation, and I'm so energized by that. It is because of them I know our future is bright. Again, I thank each of you for your amazing support of NSF. The FY23 appropriation was historic, and the FY24 request builds on those investments to ensure U.S. leadership in science, engineering, and technology into the future. I look forward to working with you all to achieve that goal. Thank you, Madam Chair, for the opportunity.
Thank you both very much for your testimony. Administrator Nelson, I want to begin with you because last year we discussed the Government Accountability Office analysis of the cost and schedule performance of major NASA projects, where GAO found that those projects are experiencing significant cost and schedule overruns. One of those projects that comes to mind in terms of those concerns is the performance of the Mars Sample Return Mission. So can you talk about how sure you are that that mission is going to stay within the $5.3 billion cost that's presented in the Planetary Decadal Service Survey last year, and also what NASA's doing to contain costs and maintain the current schedule.
Madam Chairman, yes, I'm concerned. Space happens to be hard. And a good example of that is the James Webb Space Telescope. It took twice as long. It took twice as much money. And by the way, it never would have made it had it not been for Senator Barbara Mikulski, who was the senator from the state that represented the Goddard Space Center, that was the chief investigator of the program. And then look what it's done. And it was such a high-risk mission. Once the French Ariane rocket put it on a perfect trajectory, 344 things had to work perfectly. And they did. So space is hard. As a matter of fact, President Kennedy said this over 60 years ago at Rice Stadium when he said, "We go to the moon not because it's easy, but because it's hard." And so when you get into a highly sophisticated thing, specifically with regard to your question, as the return of samples, it's one thing to land on the moon, and we've been landing on the moon for decades, landing on the Mars. We've been landing with small landers and larger and progressively larger and more sophisticated. It's another thing to get those samples all the way back. There have been slowdowns in the program. COVID is one thing that one of the investigations that you're referring to pointed to had affected JPL, the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in California, which is overseeing this mission. That's one thing. But also, there are unexpected things that come up. So much so, I was just out there, and your staff was just out at JPL, and they're saying they want another $250 million in this year, meaning in this year, the existing 2023 and 2024. And the fact is that the science budget that the president is proposing to you is the largest science budget we've ever had. It's $8.3 billion.
And excuse me for interrupting, Administrator Nelson, my time is going to be up soon, and what I'm really asking is what NASA is doing to try and address those costs. I think we all recognize that it's hard, but given the uncertainties and the fact that it is hard, how are you looking at containing costs, at maintaining the current schedule? What kinds of efforts do you have in place to try and do that may not have been anticipated when you thought everything was going to go as expected?
Specifically with regard to the Mars sample return?
Yes.
Well, some of those costs are not going to be avoided, and we're going to have to make choices. You can get it done, but it may not be done right on the time that we were hoping that it would be done. If you stretch it out over a longer period of time, you can get the problem done. There's no easy solution to this. That's what happened to James Webb, the telescope. Unless we start taking science money from other science programs or in the alternative, unless you, in your authority, understanding that the president proposes and the Congress disposes, reallocate the dollars, I don't see how we could get another $250 million in fiscal year 24.
Well, I do remember, though, with James Webb that we brought the contractor in and asked them to take a look at what they could do to ensure that the project moved better and tried to stay within cost. So I would hope that NASA is also looking at those kinds of responses.
We do that on every program. Now, for example, the rocket going back to the moon, the SLS, and its spacecraft Orion. We've had significant cost extension over time, but what we're going to do is we inherited a system of some 16 contracts on that rocket. We're going to consolidate that contract under one contract. That one contractor is going to be responsible. And the discussions are going on with the Boeing company right now that they be that contractor.
Well, thank you. My time is up. I think it's something that we can continue to explore. Senator Moran.
Chairman, thank you very much. Let me begin with you, Dr. Ponch. Let me talk about EPSCoR for a moment and broadening the opportunities for Americans wherever they live to participate in NSF programs. As you know, just 10 states receive more than half of all NSF funding, and NSF is evaluating fewer research proposals from EPSCoR states now compared to a decade ago. How do you plan to broaden the participation in NSF programs across the country? What opportunities is NSF missing by concentrating its spending in a smaller number of states? And what programs like EPSCoR are best suited to alter that circumstance?
Thank you, Senator Moran, for that question. As you know, when I came to NSF, one of my priorities has always been to unleash talent and ideas all across our nation, in every part of the nation, rural, urban, the broad socioeconomic, demographic, and the geographic diversity of our nation. So what have we done since then? I call it opportunities everywhere, innovation anywhere, as a way in which I framed this. So as you know, since coming in, we have looked at the EPSCoR states, and one of the things that we need to understand is that if ideas and talent are democratized and they're everywhere, why is it then, as you point out, not a share of the investments going to those states? It turns out that some of the institutions require significant infrastructure support in order to be able to take the great ideas and the great talent that exists in those states and in the institutions to be able to be lifted up to transcend the gold standard merit review process of NSF. So we have launched, Senator, you'll be happy to hear this, as part of the CHIPS and Science Act, we have launched this new program called GRANTED. It's an acronym, Growing Research Access Through Nationally Transformative Equity and Diversity. If NSF is good at something, it's at acronyms. So, GRANTED program, simply put, is the following. It is a virtual research office which is available to all institutions in EPSCoR states as well as emerging research institutions to be able to take the great ideas and be able to put it in a form like how do we help with proposal writing, how do we help with pre-award, post-award, budgeting, finding partnerships, etc. So they will have also the chance to be able to be successful in this process. I am glad that as part of the CHIPS and Science Act, there are clear aspirational targets in terms of where we need to get to in terms of EPSCoR state share of funding. And I can tell you that we are on track through not only just saying that we will do that, but actually putting all the efforts through programs. I've just given you one example of the GRANTED program, but we're making sure there are many other programs which draws upon the talent and ideas from EPSCoR states and non-EPSCoR states, emerging research institutions. And I'm confident that we will meet those metrics and exceed those too. That is the goal.
I appreciate your answer, of course. And it would be too early, I think, for GRANTED to be evaluated as to its success or effectiveness, but you have something in place to demonstrate improvement, I assume, that will tell us whether or not it's working and making a difference.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm only telling you about a sustained way of building this to not only what we need to achieve in the next year, but in the next 5 years. Because if you look at the CHIPS and Science Act, it is a 20% total that we have outlined for in a FY 2029. So what we are doing here is we are building the programs so that we have sustained progress year over year, but there are also other programs which we are measuring progress through which we expect that we will ensure that EPSCoR states have more than their fair share of the investments going to the states. But that is actually through specific programming that we are doing in addition to these kinds of capacity building activities.
While both of you have pointed out the science and aeronautics aspect of my state, we also produce a lot of agricultural commodities and food for not only the country but the world. I talked to a farmer today. In the last 223 days on his farm, he's received 1/10 of 1 inch of moisture. We are in a serious and severe drought of long proportions. I know of the presence of NASA in Kansas in regard to opportunities to try to help agriculture succeed in difficult times, particularly related to hydrology and water. And I would ask the NASA administrator to describe for me and others what can be done from a NASA perspective. And you, Director, from an NSF perspective, how can you help drive research and innovation needed in places like Kansas to be secure and sustain and adapt to these rapidly approaching realities that are terribly challenging? Administrator Nelson?
What can be done, in part, has already been done, and what will be done. So what is already done, as I have shared with you and some of your agricultural community, our assets overhead are so sophisticated that we can tell in this farmer's cornfield what is the moisture content. We can tell if a crop is diseased, and we can tell that from space. Needless to say, we can tell that about a forest, and also the moisture content, which has something to do with fighting fires down the line. But what we are going to do, and in the process of doing, we just put up a mission called SWAT. It will allow us in the drought-ravaged West for the very first time of all of that fresh water to know exactly what the elevation is. So if a state has hundreds of reservoirs, without having to go out and measure every one of them, within an instant, because of the measurement from space, we can tell you what is the elevation of that water. The rivers, the streams, the lakes, likewise. Now, what will be done is we're putting up a series of 4 great observatories. It is going to give a precision of what is happening to the Earth in 3D form, everything that is happening to the Earth in climate regarding the land, the water, and that's both fresh and ocean, the ice, and the atmosphere. You have this kind of information that we've never had before. Then you can make judgments, not only about the farmer, what he ought to plant, or how much he should prepare to water, but also what we do about our changing climate and the policies that you all enact with regard to that. And so that's what we've done and what we will do with your help. And Madam Chair, if I may, with regard to your former question, what I want to do, we've done a series of technical and specific things to get at this problem of program growth. We made the chief program officer our deputy administrator, Colonel Pam Melroy. We've done specific things to follow up on the reports of the decadal and the IG reports and the government accountability. We've done a number of specific things, and I'd like to submit that for the record for you.
Senator Moran, should I
Without
continue answering the
objection.
questions?
I don't know whether you want Ponch to answer. My time has clearly expired.
Why don't you, if you can
I'll
give a
do
brief
a very
answer,
quick-
that would be great.
Senator Nelson talking to you.
I know.
Senator Moran, there are many programs at NSF focused on precisely working on agriculture as a theme. We have launched 4 AI institutes in partnership with the U.S. Department of Agriculture, fully funded by USDA, in order to understand the point that you brought out, being very precise about moisture, fertilizer usage, and a whole host of things in terms of understanding how to build a smart agriculture future for our nation. So that's one thing that I want to mention. Likewise, an engineering research center focused on agriculture, a science and technology center focused on agriculture, which is much more actionable activities. But this might be a thing that might be more relevant to immediately what you raised. NSF investments have also mapped the wheat genome, so we are working on drought-resistant crops now. So we are also working on those things as we are looking at what might be the ways in which we can do more effective, efficient agriculture, and so that we can focus on the outcomes that we can receive through those activities like AI and other technologies. Yeah.
Thank you, Senator Moran. Senator Murray.
Well, thank you very much, Chair Shaheen, Ranking Member Moran. And let me just say at the top, as we continue full steam ahead in our bipartisan work to return to regular order for the first time in many years and pass funding bills in a responsible, timely way, these hearings are really an important opportunity for us to assess what we need to keep our country competitive on the world stage and to keep folks back home safe and sound. And they're also an important reminder that defense is just one part of the equation. If we maintain our competitive edge, we have to stay at the forefront of scientific discovery. And NASA and the National Science Foundation both have long, storied histories of helping our country do that. After all, the list of times that our nation has made its mark on history, the list of ways that it has established itself as a world leader is much more than a list of military achievements. It is a story of inquiry, invention, innovation, exploration, and discovery of new frontiers. Our country has seen time and again how those investments really pay off. They do strengthen our defense. They strengthen our economy. They strengthen our global leadership. Innovation and inquiry, I don't have to tell either of you, isn't just an abstract ideal. It makes our lives better. It makes our nation safer in really tangible ways. Cleaner energy, faster, more sustainable manufacturing methods, better understanding of new technology like artificial intelligence, or preparing us for rare but serious risks like asteroids or solar flares. And those investments also keep America competitive in ways that are harder to measure, but are very important that we don't overlook. The moon landing didn't just affirm our leadership in space and science. It inspired a new generation of kids to study STEM, as Bill Nelson has told me many times. And it helps us push the bounds of what is possible. So, just look at the latest photos from the James Webb Telescope. It is lighting the imagination of our kids right now. And so at the end of the day, these investments that we make in this Appropriations Committee really is an investment in our country's future. So I'm really glad that you're holding this hearing and look forward to working with both of you to have a strong bill, bipartisan bill at the end of the day. With that, Director Punch, well, short on specifics, House Republicans have been calling for cuts to non-defense discretionary programs to fiscal year 2022 levels, taking us back there. Can you talk specifically about how that would impact NSF programs, including basic research and STEM workforce development, if Congress were to go back to those levels?
Thank you, Senator Murray, and thank you for your comments. I really appreciate what you said, because this is a moment, it's a very, very important moment in our nation's history, because this is a moment, as I said, of intense global competition, and therefore we cannot take any steps back. We have to move forward. Global competition is severe, and it is serious, and it is real. So if we were to go back to FY22 levels, it will really be, it will have tremendous amount of impacts. You talked about AI in your remarks. I can tell you the AI institutes that we are launching, we'll have to cut back on AI institutes. We'll have to cut back on the quantum investments that we are making. We are going to make a new quantum investment to take the ideas from the work that is happening from basic research into translational outcomes. That would not be possible. This is called the National Quantum Virtual Laboratory, would not be able to move forward with that. In terms of Regional Innovation Engine program that we just launched, there has been tremendous interest all across our nation in terms of presenting the basic innovation ideas that are going to be possible from everywhere. And so these regional innovation engines are going to make possible the jobs of the future and new industries of the future, new entrepreneurial ventures of the future. We would have to cut back on the regional innovation engines program, and that would not be a good outcome, because we have essentially raised the excitement of the entire nation, feeling like we are ready now, we are ready to play a role in lifting up this nation and contributing to it, as well as benefiting from it to the jobs of the future and the industries of the future. So I hope that we will be able to continue the progress and leap forward rather than taking any steps back. And I look forward to the support of Congress on this one.
Yeah, thank you. And can you comment specifically on how that level of funding would impact NSF's ability to deliver on the ambitions of the Bipartisan Chips and Science Act?
So it will have a tremendous ramification. Let me give you another example, which might probably be useful. Now, the nation needs to train 280,000 new workers in semiconductors and microelectronics over the next 5 years to keep pace with the rest of the world. So a reduction would preclude NSF from being able to reach an estimated 10,000 individuals in FY24. And this really threatens our long-term U.S. competitiveness in semiconductors and other key technologies. I'm just pointing one example from the workforce. I talked about the examples in AI, quantum, biotechnology. We will not be able to launch on the bio foundries that I think we need to have many parts of our nation to be able to spur more innovative activities and therefore more jobs. And the basic research work, there is so much that are ready to be translated. We don't want to miss the moment of translating this and giving this away to our competitors to build on those translational activities and build the industries of the future. The industries of the future belong in our nation. The jobs belong here. And I think we should do everything to make sure that we do not slow or impede our progress.
Thank you very much for that. Administrator Nelson, Washington State, as you know, has seen an incredible growth of space-related companies and suppliers and researchers and innovators. And those companies have really been able to capitalize on the talented workforce graduating from our universities and use the infrastructure in place to become a hub for space exploration technology. How do you see NASA expanding and partnering with companies and universities in the Pacific Northwest?
The big difference in our space program as we go back to the moon now from half century ago is we go back not only in a public-private partnership, but also in an international partnership. Thus, for example, the first crew going to the moon, 3 Americans and 1 Canadian. In this case, when we land on the moon, NASA will go into a lunar orbit, a brand new kind of orbit that we are characterizing right now with a spacecraft in that orbit. The crew will transfer into a SpaceX lander and eventually another lander as a result of the second competition, which is going on at this point. We want to have 2 landers. That is illustrative of the public-private partnership that we have going on, but it is throughout the entire agency. It's in low Earth orbit, for example. When we shut down the space shuttle, you all helped, Kay Bailey Hutchinson and me, pass the NASA bill of 2010. That set us on this course of the dual track, a government track, but also a commercial track. And look what's come out of it. We now regularly deliver astronauts, NASA astronauts, to the International Space Station and cargo with private corporations. Now, because it's human life involved, we are all over that, double-checking, triple-checking, everything. But it is illustrative of this new public-private partnership as we go into the future that is quite different from the past.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Murray. Senator Kennedy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Administrator, welcome. Nice to see you again.
Thank you, Senator.
I want to talk to you for a second about something that I know you know a lot about, the Michoud Assembly Facility, and thank you for visiting. Bill. We really appreciate you coming out there. I think you came out late in 2021. As you know, this is an 800-acre facility in New Orleans East and employs about 4,000 people. It's 20 public and private entities, and among other things, Michoud Assembly Facility is the formal name. Michoud makes the rocket that will take the Orion spacecraft to the moon and to Mars. We had a rough few years there when we were hit by 2 hurricanes and a flood. And our roof was practically demolished. And NASA has supported, and I'm grateful for that, the money to get the roof repaired. And we're making progress. I was out there a few months ago. But, Mr. Administrator, here's what else we need help with. The administrative buildings were built in 1943. 1943. We're spending $1 million a year just trying to repair them. And now that we've got the roof back, you can't run a facility this large and this sophisticated without smart people administering all the programs. And we just need some help there. Can you give us some help?
Senator, thank you for asking that question,
You're welcome.
because the help, I can plead to you, we need the help.
Okay.
You've probably got $500 million worth of infrastructure that you need at Michoud.
Yeah.
Throughout the agencies, 10 centers plus 10 facilities. We've got $5 billion of infrastructure needs. It took me every skill that I might possess to get $100 million for Virginia and Maryland for a bridge to the Wallops Island launch facility that was going to fall in the water and was going to render that launch center obsolete. And thank goodness that you all passed an emergency appropriation.
Did we get the bridge done?
Finally.
Okay, now can we turn to the administration building at Michoud Assembly Facility?
Senator, if you will appropriate it, I'll come.
We'll appropriate.
And
we will appropriate
I will
it. But I just
deliver-
want to make sure, Mr. Administrator, that once we appropriate it, it's a priority for you.
It absolutely is, and
Okay.
$5 billion. And let me just say how key Michoud is, because it's located next to water and waterways.
Yep.
And so when the contract under Boeing puts together these big cores of this largest rocket, puts it on a barge, engines as well, which eventually come from up in Senator Britt's constituency, and they come down the Tin Tom waterway, and they come to New Orleans, and they're assembled there before they go to Mississippi to the Stennis, and they test these engines, and then they assemble all that together, and then on a barge, it goes to the Kennedy Space Center.
Yes.
It's critically located.
Do you mind if I interrupt you, because I'm going to run out of time? If I could
Yes,
have another
please.
30 seconds to talk to the director here. Mr. Director, in 15 seconds, tell me the purpose of EPSCOR.
The purpose of EPSCOR is to ensure that we make the talent and ideas in all of those regions in our country that have not been given the chance to express in its fullest form.
Let me put it another way. We passed EPSCOR 44 years ago. The problem was that all this money that we were giving you, your agency, was being spent in 10 states. Congress said, we've got smart people all over America. start spending some of the money in other states. 44 years later, you're still spending the money in 10 states. You're still doing it. Not 4 months, not 4.4 years, 44 years. And I appreciate you creating a new program, granted or grunted or whatever you call it, okay? When are you going to start doing what EPSCoR is supposed to do?
So, Senator, the way I can answer it is, I come from a small state myself, so I understand the opportunities and the
Yeah, but I
potential.
want you to answer my question.
Yeah, I'm going to answer your
Okay?
question.
Don't answer my question, because the chair's been very indulgent here. Answer my question. When are you going to start doing what the statute says you're supposed
Senator,
to
it's
do?
already started. In fact, it's accelerating now. It's accelerating now, making sure that we are able to deliver on the EPSCoR promises that we have made, and the CHIPS and Science Act has even set targets, which I believe that those targets should be exceeded, not even met. So I am deeply committed, the agency is deeply committed to ensuring, and there is metrics associated with that now, so you will see progress. So this situation...
Well, we haven't seen progress in 44 years.
I'm talking about now, Senator, moving forward. I am committed, as the director now, I'm committed to delivering on the progress.
Okay. I thank you, Madam Chair, for the indulgence.
Thank you, Senator Kennedy. Senator Peters.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Administrator Nelson, it's certainly wonderful to see you here today. Welcome back to the Senate. Administrator Nelson, in 2020, the President signed into law legislation that I authored to strengthen the nation's ability to predict severe space weather events and mitigate the harmful impacts on Earth. It was called the Pro-SWIFT Act. And as you know, a severe space weather event such as a solar flare or a coronal mass ejection has the potential to deeply disrupt the power grid, communications, GPS, satellites, potentially catastrophic. Space weather events have also implications for space situational awareness and space traffic management, which are crucial to protecting all of the assets we currently have in low Earth orbit. My legislation takes steps to address these threats, but now it's got to be implemented. NASA will play a crucial role in ensuring the success of this legislation and protecting the U.S. and the world from these space weather events. So my question for you, sir, is do you agree with me on the importance of understanding space weather events, and how is NASA currently prioritizing the implementation of the Pro-SWIFT Act and space weather research broadly?
Senator Peters, not only do I agree with you about the importance of understanding space weather, as a matter of fact, we started with, back in the time when Al Gore was vice president, on a mission called Triana. And because of politics, it was cut for almost a decade. And we resuscitated it with additional instruments with the help of the Air Force into a mission called Discover. And it is giving us early warning on space weather. In other words, the solar explosions of the sun that start sending radiation to Earth. This mission that you're talking about, GDC, is a very important one. In the largest science budget ever, you can't fit 10 pounds of potatoes in a 5-pound sack. So there's a mission that the chair is very concerned with called a swarm mission that is all about understanding heliophysics, of which this GDC is a part. Mm-hmm. Something had to be slowed. The feeling was that we should move ahead with the University of New Hampshire project, not because it was UNH, but because it was well down the road. Slow up the GDC, but it will come unless you all want to give us a lot more money for science.
The key thing is it will come. What sort of timeline?
I'll have to get back to you on the actual timing.
I'd appreciate
I don't
that.
have that memorized.
No, I appreciate that. Thank you. Dr. Punch, I certainly applaud the President's budget calls out the NSF intention to fund almost $800 million in research related to artificial intelligence under the newly created Directorate for Technology, Innovation, and Partnerships. I certainly believe, and I think you do as well, that AI holds just incredible promise for economic opportunity, human advancement, but we have to find responsible ways to support it and leverage these activities. Last Congress, I passed the AI Scholarship for Service Act and the AI Training Act to promote AI education as well as professional development for folks in this rapidly developing field. My question for you, sir, is can you discuss the importance of investing in AI research and education, but more specifically, what is the criteria that NSF uses when deciding which AI applicants receive funding? As the administrator said, you can't put 10 pounds in a 5-pound bag. What's the criteria for selecting which ones you invest in?
Senator, thank you for your question, and I too thank the investments that is being proposed for NSF, and particularly in the area of AI investments that we're going to be making in FY24. So the criteria that we use is, of course, the best ideas is a commitment that we need to make in order to source the best ideas to be invested in. As you know, AI of today, as you see it, is because of sustained investments of NSF over the last 5 decades of sourcing the best ideas, investing in the best ideas, and making sure that they see the light at the end of the day. So we're very happy about that. NSF, as you may know, is the largest non-defense funder of AI research. So the second, and even more important for me, because if I were to describe, Senator Peters, about what NSF does, NSF is about people, people, and people. That is, we train the talent. The ideas, yes, at the end of the day, the ideas come from people. And those are the people that go and take the jobs, create the jobs, and those are the people that, as skilled technical workforce, contribute to the industries of the future industries of today. So it's about the people, and those are the people who become the entrepreneurs. So therefore, on the what we fund, therefore, best ideas, commitment to training the talent at all levels, not just only research, PhD, and postdoctoral, as important as they are, but graduate students, undergraduate students, community college students, skilled technical workforce, and also inspiring talent in K-12 so that they might then pursue those career opportunities as they think about the future. And so, in fact, we introduced, as part of the TIP Directorate that you referenced, that we launched recently, there's a program called Excellent. It's about experiential learning on these technologies of the future, and so important technologies of the future. So this program, again, invests in how might we connect industry and academia and have the internships inspire the talent so they can be ready for the jobs of today and tomorrow. So these are the multifaceted way in which we are looking at AI and what it can do for the future. You alluded to something which I want to sort of expand on. While we're doing this, we want to make sure that AI is not just about the technology. We are also bringing in the application inspirations. We have invested many AI institutes, 25 of them so far, each at $20 million scale all across our country. We're about to announce another 6 of them in a few weeks. So all of these are focused on AI for agriculture, AI for weather, AI for learning, as well as the core AI principles that are being fostered, but in partnership with companies like Google, Amazon, Intel, Accenture, and a whole host of companies, and working with other agencies, Department of Transportation, Department of Homeland Security, and a whole host of all these agencies also who have aspirations in terms of using AI for advancing their impact and ideas into the future. So we're working on a comprehensive set of investments around AI to make sure that every talent and idea that can be inspired and that should be inspired for our nation's future in this very important area is inspired. So we are bringing social behavioral economic sciences into the equation. At NSF, we are therefore looking at it as a cross-directorate fusion of our AI, because we know that AI is going to penetrate every aspect of our society. So instead of being an afterthought, why not look at the issues of privacy, security, safety, responsible AI, explainable AI. You think of all of the things that we need to do with AI. Why not do that, as an a priori thinking by bringing in social behavioral economic sciences and other disciplinary inspirations to address this in a holistic manner? I hope I've given you a complete picture of how we are looking at AI, because it's an exceedingly important technology that I think all of us are going to be touched by and increasingly touched by into the future.
All right. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Peters. Senator Britt.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Administrator, Director, thank you for the enthusiasm that you have both shown for the important work that is done in both agency and the NSF. I want to thank you for being here today. Administrator Nelson, I want to start by telling you how much I appreciate the kind words that you said about Marshall Space Flight Center. I could not agree with you more. They have created a legacy of excellence. The men and women there have put in the work to literally take us to new heights, and we are all better for it. I also want to congratulate you, the NASA workforce, particularly Marshall Space Flight Center, and the hundreds of suppliers and contractors for the successful launch of the Space Launch System last year. Tens of thousands of very talented and smart people throughout the country and in my home state of Alabama were responsible for a flawless SLS launch, and I am deeply proud of what they have accomplished. And I am committed to making sure that we keep this momentum going. I was pleased to see the recent announcement of the Artemis II crew, and we are, of course, eager to get back to the moon on Artemis III. But the reality is we can't stop there. We have to take advantage of the progress that we've made and the workforce that has been built over the years. We need to be preparing now for a more sustained cadence of launches in Artemis IV, Artemis V, and beyond. The key to maintaining our high-tech workforce and to grow our capability in deep space will be the exploration upper stage and the next generation of SLS, the Block 1B program. Congress has, on a bipartisan basis, strongly supported the continued development of the EUS and the Block 1B program. It will be critical to getting more payload and capability to lunar orbit. Administrator Nelson, does the President's budget request for FY24 provide enough resources to ensure that we remain on time for the Artemis missions 2, 3, and 4?
Yes, ma'am, with the proviso that if we get the second competition for the second lander and it comes in within the constraints of what the President has proposed, then we can move on to Artemis 5 and 6 and so forth, because we'll have a second option on a lander. With regard to Artemis 4, as you and I have discussed, part of the holdup there is the Mobile Launcher 2 that, again, for part of the frustrations that we have with contractors, is delayed, and it's got to be a much taller mobile launch platform for a larger rocket, a heavier rocket.
Right.
And so it has to be redone. But I'll tell you, one of the things that we'd never make it is picking up on Senator Patty Murray's question, is if the Congress comes in with some across-the-board sequester cut, or if the Congress reverted to the 2022 budget, with the exception of defense and veterans, NASA would be devastated.
And Administrator Nelson, I appreciate it. I only have a minute left, so I'll say I'm glad you're optimistic, because it was my understanding that we were several $100 million short to continue the SLS Block 1B development, including the EUS and associated systems. So my next question has two parts. As NASA continues to plan and prepare for the Artemis missions, one, how will NASA identify the type of habitat required? And two, what role do you see Marshall Space Flight Center having in the habitat mission?
Well, let me define habitat. First of all, there's going to be a rover that we saw a first sample of it in Japan recently, where the astronauts can don their spacesuits, and in a habitable module, they can roam around the surface. But if you mean by habitat that we actually build something, and we are experimenting with that using the lunar soil, the regolith, mixing it with a magic potion and creating a concrete landing pad and a concrete structure. Yes, we're going to do that. And your specific question, is Marshall going to be a part of that? Well, we're formulating that now, but Marshall
hope so.
has a lot of that kind of expertise.
Absolutely. We have the expertise and the workforce and are very well suited to help us as we continue this mission.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Mr. Administrator.
Thank you, Senator Britt. Senator Reed.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman. First, let me welcome and say my best to Bill Nelson, who I had the privilege of serving with for many years on the Armed Services Committee. And thank you, Mr. Administrator. You're doing a great job. I think the only recommendation would be more investment in Rhode Island would be very beneficial to the space program. So please don't feel constrained by any other limits. But thank you very much. Pardon?
Oceans, not space.
We're pretty spacey up there. But I'll direct my questions direct upon Chantan. First of all, I look forward to seeing you next week up in Rhode Island. So thank you very much. And thank you for your work on the CHIPS Act and the Science Act. It was particularly good. And in that bill, we boosted the EPSCoR program at the National Science Foundation. We're increasing it from, I believe, 15% to 20% of the funding. And I think EPSCoR, as you've said it several times, is a great program because it tries to target scientific research across the country and not just in the hubs in which typically money goes. This effort in expanding EPSCoR was the result of work with Senator Wicker, my colleague, and Senator Cortez Matsos. Let me thank them too. Can you tell us your plan, your commitment to increase this EPSCoR funding as required by CHIPS, and what sort of ideas you have?
Thank you very much, Senator Reed. I, too, am looking forward to visiting Rhode Island. I know something about Rhode Island, having, in my previous job, helped build the innovation campus in Rhode Island with the University of Rhode Island, and so looking forward to the visit. To answer your question, as I was mentioning earlier, you are absolutely correct that talent and ideas are in all states, everywhere, and it's our responsibility as a nation to bring out all of the talent and ideas. And so EPSCoR program precisely addresses that particular objective. So what we are doing at NSF is several things. It's not only through the EPSCoR program that we are trying to make sure that we are providing the opportunities. It's a focused program, but we are making sure through all of the activities of NSF that the EPSCoR states the opportunities are maximized. And so I refer to the granted program as how do we make sure that when you write proposals to all the programs, it can be research centers, it can be AI institutes, it can be the quantum centers. So all of this should be where EPSCoR states have a chance of succeeding very, very well. So that's how you make sure that you not only meet the targets that you mentioned, that aspirationally we have set up from 15 to 20%, but we even exceed those targets. And that's my hope, is because at the end of the day, my plan, you said not just hope, it's a plan. At the end of the day, you want to make sure that that is the only way that you're going to get all of the talent and ideas work for our country. And that's the only way we're going to outcompete our competitors. Because if we leave behind this talent and ideas in some parts of the country, we will not get there. And yes, we need to energize the places where good work is happening, but we need to energize even more the work that is not happening right now because the focus is required. And that's what we're working hard at NSF. And I give you my commitment that this is something that I am very focused on, very interested in, and I look forward to the outcomes.
Thank you very much. Let me just mention two other Rhode Island-related programs. One is ICERM, which is hosted at Brown University, and you're aware of it. It's 1,500 scientists and students a year come to their programs and research, and it also has a great outreach program making a real difference in schools in Rhode Island, especially young women and underrepresented minorities. And I want to mention that program, and it could be a model that you might suggest otherwhere throughout the United States. And finally, we expect the arrival of the Narragansett Dawn oceanographic ship, the University of Rhode Island. Do you have any idea when it's going to arrive?
Yeah. Thank you very much, Senator, on that question. The RCRVs are really, the shining examples of how do we make sure that we are doing the ocean exploration, and being in the vanguard of innovation in scientific discovery. So I had the good fortune, in fact, of being in one of those research vessels just last week in the RV Carson. So to answer your question on that one, COVID and the hurricane in Louisiana had delayed things, but we are on track right now. So we are going to have this delivered this time next year, close to this time next year, is where we are targeting Narragansett Don's delivery. That's what we're targeting. So
since the Secretary of Commerce commissioned the ship and is a sponsor of the ship, I think she might be up there too. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate your help and support.
Thank you, Senator Reed. Senator Van Hollen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's great to see both of you. Mr. Administrator, my friend Bill, I'll be back and question you in a minute. I'm going to start with the doctor, Dr. Panchanathan. Great to see you again.
See you again.
And I appreciated the chance to talk to you by phone about 3 weeks, a month ago.
Yes.
About implementing certain provisions that I worked with and with others on as part of the CHIPS and Science Act, and thank you for your implementation there. So I just want to go over those two major provisions again. One was something I worked with Senator Blunt on, who's retired, as you know, but it was to make sure that the United States is able on an ongoing basis to identify cutting-edge technologies so that we never get caught behind, again, as we did on 5G, and to provide a strategy, workforce and other elements to support achieving our goals in those cutting-edge technologies. The other provision was one that I worked with Senator Tillis on to make sure that NSF invests in the great possibilities and potential of HBCUs when it comes to scientific research and R&D. So I just want your assurance today that you are moving forward on the issues we discussed during that conversation, and look forward to seeing them to fruition.
Senator, it was truly a pleasure talking to you the other day, and you did bring up the National SEAL Act of 2021, which in the CHIPS and Science has now become the 10387H, where we are working with the National Academy of Sciences, Engineering, Medicine, NASEN, through their studies to make sure that we are always keeping us ahead in terms of looking at not only the technologies of today and tomorrow, but technologies of the future. You have my absolute commitment that we're going to work to make sure that we take all the inputs through various strategic discussions that we have, through our listening sessions that we have with industry leaders and others, but also through the National Academy studies, that we are always ensuring that we are looking at the technologies of the future and investing in the technologies of the future. On the other one, your HBCU RISE Act, which then became as part of CHIPS and Science that you referred, which is the 10524D regarding capacity building at HBCUs. I can tell you that, as part of the granted program, I have met with the chancellors and presidents of the HBCUs, and the HBCUs and the Research 2 category of HBCUs that you referred to, Senator, we are deeply committed to making sure that there are targeted programs. We have several programs, including the HBCU Excellence in Research Program as one example of a program, HBCU Research Experience for Undergraduates. These are programs by which we are committed to making sure that the objective that you have laid out and outlined in our conversation and today are not only met but exceeded.
I appreciate that and look forward to working with you on continued implementation. So, Mr. Administrator, thank you for your focus on many of the important space assets we have in the state of Maryland, starting with the Goddard Space Flight Center, and congratulations on the appointment of the new director, Mackenzie Lystrup. I look forward to having a call with her a little bit later this week. Thank you for your efforts on Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Lab, as well as the Space Telescope Institute in Baltimore, and of course Wallops. I know you've been to Wallops Space Flight Center, and it was good to work with you on getting the funding in the last appropriations bill for that very important bridge. So thank you for all of that. That's the good news. Now, I do want to address a couple provisions in the budget request that, in my view, have a serious deficiency. One is in the area of heliophysics, and I think maybe the chair raised this issue, a cut of $55 million overall. It will, in my view, that cut will make it much harder to reach the decadal objectives. So look forward to working with the chair and committee colleagues on restoring that funding. The other area is planetary science. The Dragonfly mission is proposed to take a cut of 20%. Even though while cutting 20%, you kept the same launch date in the budget. And everything I know from the experts is that doesn't compute. You can't cut by 20% and still remain on target. And I am troubled by the fact that it looks like monies were taken from the Mars sample return. In other words, you see an increase there. Even though, if you look at the recent reports on both these programs, when it comes to the Dragonfly mission, the independent review provided a positive preliminary design review, whereas I think you're aware that was not the case when it came to the Mars sample return. So we look forward to working with you to address the deficiency in the Dragonfly mission budget. The other is in the earth science area, where the administration's budget proposes to zero out the Earth Observing System Series satellites, Terra, Aqua, and Aura, which are still productive. They're still generating very important research. So I'm going to be looking forward to working with you, I hope, and our colleagues on the committee to keep those systems going so long as they're generating useful information. I would also suggest, Mr. Administrator, that we have a follow-on plan. Unless the decision is that the data, we don't want to collect this kind of data in the future, we need to keep it going while it's good and have a backup, a future strategy to collect it going forward. Would you be willing to work with us to make sure that we address these the shortcomings in the budget?
Of course. And as I have said, because this subject has come up several times, this budget represents the largest science budget ever, $8.3 billion. Now, how do you get 10 pounds of potatoes in a 5-pound sack? Something has to be delayed. It is felt that a University of New Hampshire program on heliophysics, which is well down the road, needed the money called a swarm mission, and that since you're dealing with a certain amount for science, 8.3, where are you going to get? When all of a sudden the Jet Propulsion Laboratory says we need another $250 million in this year, and that was just said 2 weeks ago. And so you have to make choices. With regard to Dragonfly, it is going to fly in about 2027. And we think by the end of this year, we will have a good fix on how that's going and its funding. So all of these things, we need to work with you. And as I have said earlier with the chairman, we can propose a budget, and this is the president proposes, but you dispose.
I appreciate that, and maybe the chair raised this, but my understanding is that in addition to cost overruns, significant cost overruns involved with the Mars sample return, that the independent, I believe it was the GAO report, but it was an independent report, also found flaws in the preliminary design aspect of that project. So yeah, I guess there's a question as to why to increase, at this point in time, funding for a program that has not stacked up well compared to some of the other programs like Dragonfly. And so that's what we're going to want to explore with you. Not that we shouldn't proceed eventually on both, But there is this timing question that you raised, so I appreciate your response, and we look forward to working with you.
Well, may I address that issue of design?
Yeah.
Senator Van Hollen, we are very much an international approach to our science as well as the human space program. You doggone right. There was a problem with design because originally the lander was going to be a European lander. And all of a sudden, the European Space Agency figures out that they can't get it done for the prices. And so we're scrambling at that point because this is a critically highly sophisticated maneuver to bring back at least 10, if not 30 samples in titanium tubes this big from the surface of Mars so we can determine was there life in that dry lake bed at the mouth of the river that dumped into that lake bed on Mars. And so in scrambling to come up, it's come up with a whole new concept. We send the lander, and the lander, if Perseverance, which has 30 of the tubes, is still working by the time the lander's there, Perseverance will deliver the 30 tubes to the lander. Otherwise, we're going to send 2 helicopters with the lander. This is all gee whiz stuff. And the helicopters are going to go and pick up the 10 tubes that we have already deposited on the surface of Mars. And then if that isn't enough, once they deposit it in the lander, which has the ascent vehicle, that goes up in the Martian orbit and rendezvous with the now being constructed, already being constructed, European Space Agency return vehicle, which ultimately produces the canister or the device that can withstand the heat of reentry with either 30 or 10 of these sample tubes. So as you can see, there's been a lot of scrambling to catch up because it was a design that evaporated in midair.
I appreciate that. I just don't want to see the changes needed to be made to compensate for those problems being taken out of other very important priorities. So, but let me end on another positive thank you note, which was the JEDI mission. Thank you for making sure that we could extend that mission and working with Congressman Hoyer and myself to make sure that we could do that. Thank you for that. I know you're balancing a lot of things, and we look forward to working with you, the committee, I know the chair does, on all these priorities. Thank you.
And that's a science mission on the space station that had to be moved in order for another science mission, and once that's done, then move back. And that's how we save that JEDI mission.
Yeah, no, I appreciate your making sure that
And
could continue.
thank you for finally, I've never worked so hard on anything in my life as that little bridge going to Wallops.
Thank you. I know you raised it
You,
repeatedly.
Tim
Thank you.
Payne and Mark and Ben, thank you all for helping out.
Thank you. Thank you for all you're doing.
Well, thank you, Senator Van Hollen. We may have one other senator on the way, and in the meantime, I have just one more question for each of you. Dr. Ponch, in 2016, NSF unveiled what they called big ideas that they were going to be looking at investing in the future. One of those big ideas was navigating a new Arctic. I think it's an important program. Certainly as we look at the impacts of climate change, figuring out what's happening in the Arctic is critical. New Hampshire is working in a number of areas around some of those issues, including infrastructure that's affected by rising sea levels and flooding during high tides, something that affects all of the states represented here by senators that have coastlines. Now, last year you committed to me that NSF would not forget the effects of a changing Arctic in the North Atlantic. But as NSF moves away from that big ideas proposal, how will you continue to integrate that work in the Arctic into the programs of NSF?
Thank you, Senator Shaheen, for asking that question. You know, when the big ideas was constructed, right, it was to make sure that we had a specific focus on themes that we felt was important over a decade. But what happens is that you then make it systemic. You're not, this is, if you think of these ideas as incubating the focus area, then they have to become systemic as part of the functions of the agency. So we are not by any means walking away from navigating the Arctic focus area. What we're doing is we're embedding it into the thinking of the programs that are already at NSF and emphasizing that piece. So I just want to make sure that we don't give the wrong impression that somehow that some big idea coming to an end doesn't, and being sort of shining the light on that in a particular way means that we have walked away from it. Quite the contrary. It's that we are making it a spot because it's a very, very important priority. Arctic is an important priority for NSF and in so many ways. And so I just want to tell you that it is not that there is not ending a program, but systematizing it as part of the thinking of NSF and continuing the investments through the regular programs of NSF.
Well, thank you. I'm pleased to hear that because, as we know, the Arctic is becoming an even more critical area of competition between the United States and our great power competitors. So our continued work in the Arctic is going to be even more important.
Yes.
Administrator Nelson, I want to return to something else that we discussed at the hearing last year, and that has gained increased relevance as we see what's happening in Europe with the war in Ukraine, and that is Russia's involvement in the International Space Station. Last year when I asked you this question, I think you were very confident that Russia would continue to be a positive player in the International Space Station. Since then, we have seen a deterioration in Russia's participation in the international community. So can you talk about how confident you are that Russia will continue to be a player in the International Space Station and what we're thinking about if they decide to suddenly withdraw from their participation?
Madam Chair, it's one of the great ironies of our time that President Putin can be so aggressive and so inhumane in what he is directing that is happening in Ukraine. And at the same time, there is a very professional, competent relationship between the U.S., indeed, our other international partners, and the Russians with regard to space, not only between the cosmonauts and the astronauts on board the International Space Station, not only on the fact that we launch integrated crews with an American astronaut launching on a Russian Soyuz and a Russian cosmonaut launching on the U.S. SpaceX Dragon Falcon 9 rocket. Not only that, but also the fact that there is a mission control of Americans and Russians in Moscow as well as Houston. And it is all working. Now, why is it working? Well, there's precedent for this. Even during the Cold War of the Soviet Union, an American spacecraft and a Soviet spacecraft, the American spacecraft rendezvoused and docked, and the crews lived together in space. And that set the tone for the civilian space program between otherwise two enemies, two political and geopolitical enemies. And that cooperation, peaceful in the civilian space program, as distinguished from military or intelligence, has unbelievably continued to the day. even so much so that when the Russians put up the first space station called Mir, they had our American astronauts flying up and joining, and had eventually the space shuttle come and dock with Mir. And so then we designed and built together the International Space Station, which, by the way, is as big as a football stadium from one goalpost to the other. And that cooperation continues. We have to operate it together. An example that you just couldn't believe had happened a few years ago when the Russians did an ASAT test, and it caused so much, thousands, tens of thousands of pieces of debris, it threatened the space station upon which were Russian cosmonauts. I think that was probably one hand not knowing what the other hand was doing, but we had to move the space station to get out of the way of some of that debris that was caused by a Russian anti-satellite test. And Madam Chairman, you have pointed out one of the great anomalies, and hopefully one that continues. Because if we can continue peacefully working together in space, maybe that's a template for the future.
Well, thank you very much. Bill, I agree with you. I think it's a very important relationship, and hopefully we will see it continue. And Vladimir Putin will continue to participate in ways that are very positive, not just to the United States, but to Russia and to the rest of the world. So thank you. Thank you both for your testimony. If there are no further questions this afternoon, senators have until April 25th to submit additional questions for the subcommittee's official hearing record. We would request on any of those questions that NASA and NSF respond within 30 days. The subcommittee stands in recess until Wednesday, May 26th at 2:30 p.m., when we will hold a hearing on the budget request of the Department of Commerce. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.